You were warned. Watch at your own risk, but you chose to continue. Now, get ready. A quiet night. A restless mind. A shadow outside the window that shouldn't be there. You tell yourself it's nothing, just your imagination. But then, it moves. The knocking starts, and the whispers call your name. You were told never to look out the window at 3 a.m., but now it knows you're watching, and it's not leaving until it gets what it came for. You made your choice. Now, face the terror. Watch till the end, if you dare. I never believed in superstitions. Ghost stories, urban legends, whispers about the supernatural, none of them ever felt real to me. They were just stories, passed down to scare kids or entertain people looking for a thrill. But there was one warning I should have taken seriously. Never look out the window at 3 a.m. It started as a joke among my friends. We would stay up late, sharing eerie stories we found online, testing our courage by doing whatever those stories warned against. Bloody Mary, the midnight game, calling our own phone numbers in the mirror, none of them ever worked. It was all just nonsense, or so I thought. Then, one night, my grandmother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between fear and sorrow. She took my hand and squeezed it tightly, her fingers ice-cold against my skin. "You must never, ever look out the window at 3 a.m., she said, her voice trembling. I almost laughed, but her grip tightened. There was something desperate in her eyes, something that sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't joking. "Promise me," she insisted. I hesitated but nodded. "Okay, I promise." But I didn't mean it. The next night, curiosity got the best of me. Why would she say something like that? What could possibly be out there that was so dangerous? It had to be just another old superstition, right? Something people made up to keep kids from getting scared at night? The thought of it lingered in my mind, teasing me like an unsolved mystery. What if I did look? As the hours dragged on, I found myself growing restless. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. Then 2 a.m. My room was bathed in the soft blue glow of my phone screen as I mindlessly scrolled through social media, distracting myself from the creeping unease that had settled in my chest. But then, something changed. The air in my room grew heavier, thicker, as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. The silence was suffocating, pressing against my eardrums with an unnatural weight. My phone screen dimmed, and for a second, I thought the power had gone out. Then my eyes drifted to the clock. 2:59 a.m. A chill ran down my spine. My grandmother's warning echoed in my head, louder than before. My hands felt clammy, my heart hammering against my ribs. I swallowed hard. What was I so afraid of? 3 a.m. The moment the clock changed, my breath caught in my throat. A sound. A soft, deliberate tap against the glass of my bedroom window. I froze. Another tap. Then another. My stomach twisted into knots as every nerve in my body screamed for me to stay still. Don't look. But I had already broken my promise once. And now, something was waiting for me to do it again. I told myself it was just the wind. A tree branch. A bird, maybe. Anything but what my mind was desperately trying to avoid. But then it came again. Tap. 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 Slow. Rhythmic. Deliberate. My breath hitched in my throat. The sound wasn't random, it wasn't the kind of noise nature made by accident. Someone, or something, was tapping on my window. I lay completely still in my bed, gripping the blanket like a child hiding from a nightmare. My room, once familiar and safe, now felt like a fragile bubble on the verge of bursting. I didn't want to look. I shouldn't have looked. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the urge became. The silence stretched between the knocks, growing heavier, more unbearable. It felt like something was waiting, expecting me to acknowledge it. I took a shaky breath and turned my head ever so slightly toward the window. Tap. 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 The sound was closer now, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe if I didn't move, if I didn't react, it would go away. And then... scratch. A slow, dragging scrape of something sharp against the glass. A chill shot down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but remain frozen under my blanket. But fear had locked me in place. It knew I was awake. It knew I was listening. I couldn't stop myself. My body acted before my brain could scream no. I turned my head just enough to see the edge of the window. My curtains were slightly open, just a sliver. Enough to see the darkness outside. Enough to see movement. A shadow. Tall. Motionless. Looming just beyond the glass. It wasn't my reflection. It wasn't a trick of the light. Something was standing there. Watching me. My stomach dropped. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't make out any features at all. Just an outline, distorted, shifting, like it didn't belong in this world. I should have screamed. I should have bolted out of bed and run to my grandmother's room. But I didn't. I blinked. And in that instant, the shadow was gone. The tapping stopped. The scratching ceased. The silence returned. For a few agonizing moments, I just lay there, waiting. Listening. Nothing. Had I imagined it? My shaking fingers reached for my phone, desperate for some kind of reality check. I turned on the screen. 3:01 a.m. Only a minute had passed. A deep sense of dread settled in my gut. The room felt wrong, tainted by something I couldn't understand. I turned my back to the window, pulled the covers over my head, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe it really had been my imagination. Maybe. But as I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still standing out there. Waiting. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my window, bathing my room in a warmth that felt almost unnatural. For a moment, I could almost convince myself that last night had been nothing more than a dream. Almost. But the unease in my chest wouldn't fade. Every time I glanced at the window, a tight knot formed in my stomach. The memory of that shadow, tall, shifting, watching, clung to me like a sickness. I forced myself to push it aside. Maybe I had been half asleep. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me. Sleep paralysis, a waking nightmare, there had to be a logical explanation. But then I saw it. Scratches. Thin, jagged marks running down the outside of my window, as if something with sharp fingers had dragged them across the glass. My breath hitched. I stepped closer, my fingers trembling as I touched the cold surface. The lines were deep enough to be real, tangible proof that last night had happened. A chill ran through me. Something had been here. And it had left a mark. I felt nauseous. I had to tell someone. My grandmother was in the kitchen when I found her, humming softly as she stirred a pot of soup. The moment she saw my face, her expression darkened. "You looked, didn't you?" she said. My mouth went dry. I don't know," I stammered. She set the spoon down and took my hand, her grip firmer than before. "Did you see it?" I hesitated. "It." She said it like it was something real. Like she knew exactly what I was talking about. I swallowed hard and nodded. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that terrified me more than the thing outside my window. Resignation. "It knows you now." A shiver crawled down my spine. "It knows me?" "You should have listened," she muttered, shaking her head. "You should never look." My skin prickled with unease. "What is it?" I whispered. She sighed, glancing toward the window as if she expected to see something standing there even now. "A shadow that doesn't belong here," she murmured. It waits. It watches. And once you see it, it never truly leaves. A lump formed in my throat. What do I do? My grandmother didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned back to her soup, stirring in slow, deliberate circles. Don't acknowledge it. Don't look for it. Don't let it know you're afraid. I wanted to believe her words could protect me. That if I simply ignored whatever I had seen, it would go away. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I had seen it. And it had seen me. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the shifting shadow, the way it loomed just beyond the glass. My grandmother's warning echoed in my head, "It knows you now." I wanted to believe that ignoring it would make it disappear. That if I just stayed in bed, kept my eyes shut, and refused to acknowledge its presence, it would eventually give up. But deep down, I knew better. The air in my room felt heavy, thick with something unseen. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, slow, pounding, like a drum in the silence. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., the air shifted. A coldness seeped into the room. The kind that doesn't come from an open window or a faulty heater. It was unnatural, a creeping, bone-deep chill that wrapped itself around me like unseen fingers. I squeezed my eyes shut and gripped the blanket tighter. Don't look. Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it know you're afraid. But it was too late. I didn't need to see it to know it was there. I could feel it. A presence. Standing near the window. Watching me. The same way a predator watches its prey before striking. I held my breath, hoping, praying, that if I stayed perfectly still, it would leave. That maybe it would think I was asleep, that I hadn't truly seen it the night before. And then I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Almost too quiet to catch. But it was there. Low. Uneven. Like something trying to form words it didn't quite understand. Saw me. My blood turned to ice. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. Ignore it. Ignore it. Knows me. The voice was closer now. Right outside the window. Something was pressing against the glass. I could hear it, the faintest sound of shifting weight, of something leaning in. Then came the worst sound of all. The handle of my window, moving. A slow, deliberate rattle. Testing. Pressing. Trying to get in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap from my bed and bolt out of the room, but fear had turned my limbs to stone. The whispering continued, distorted, wrong, like a broken recording of my own thoughts. And then, just as suddenly as it started. Silence. I stayed like that for hours, curled under my blanket, waiting for the first light of morning. When it finally came, I forced myself to look. The window was locked. But the handle was turned halfway. Something had tried to open it. I wasn't safe anymore. I never was. The next night, I refused to sleep. I sat upright in bed, my back pressed against the headboard, blanket clutched tightly around me. I didn't care how ridiculous it seemed, I wasn't letting my guard down. Something had tried to come in last night. And worse, it had whispered. That voice, distorted, broken, was still ringing in my ears, repeating those words, saw me. Knows me. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that exhaustion had twisted my senses. But the window handle told me otherwise. I hadn't dreamed it. It had been real. And I was afraid tonight would be worse. The clock on my nightstand read 2:47 a.m. My entire body was tense, waiting. Dreading. Minutes crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. 2:59 a.m. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tightened my grip on the blanket, breath shallow and uneven. Then, as the clock struck 3 a.m., the whispering began. It didn't start with a knock. No rattling window handle. No slow build-up like last time. It began immediately, as if something had been standing outside my window this entire time, waiting for the exact moment to start. "Let me in." The words were clearer than before. More human, yet not quite. They carried a wrongness, a stretched and twisted imitation of speech. My stomach turned. I clenched my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still. If I ignored it, if I pretended not to hear, maybe it would stop. "I know you're awake." Cold terror gripped me. It knew. It knew. A slow scrape of fingers, nails, dragged against the glass. Not like before, when it had been testing the window. This time, it was deliberate. Mocking. It was playing with me. I forced myself to breathe as quietly as possible, keeping my face buried in my knees. "I can see you." No. No, it couldn't. The curtains were drawn. The window was closed. There was no way it could see me. Unless... My breath hitched. Had I left a gap? Panic clawed at my chest. I hadn't checked. My mind raced back to earlier in the evening. I had drawn the curtains, but was there a sliver left open? A space small enough for something to peer through? I couldn't look. I couldn't move. If I did, I might confirm the worst. That something was standing outside, staring directly at me. The whispering stopped. Silence. My body remained rigid, waiting. I didn't dare let my guard down. Then, just when I thought it was over, a single knock. Soft. Almost polite. And then, in a voice too close, too clear. "See you tomorrow." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear it again, that whisper, that slow, deliberate knock. "See you tomorrow." The words replayed in my head like a curse, filling every dark corner of my thoughts. The way it spoke. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a question. It was a promise. I sat in bed, blanket wrapped around me like armor, but nothing could shield me from the creeping terror that had lodged itself in my chest. The air in my room felt heavier now, thick with the knowledge that something, someone, was watching. Waiting. The first sliver of sunlight broke through my window at 6:42 a.m. I had never been more relieved to see daylight. But I didn't move. Not yet. I needed to check. With a slow, trembling breath, I turned my head toward the window. My curtains were still drawn, just as I had left them. But the fear hadn't left me. Something had been there last night. And something would return tonight. I forced myself to stand, every muscle stiff with exhaustion and tension. My body ached from staying in the same position for so long, but I ignored it. I needed to check the window. With hesitant fingers, I reached for the curtain. And froze. The handle was turned again. Halfway. Just like before. Only this time, something was off. There were smudges on the glass. Faint, almost invisible in the morning light. I leaned closer, heart pounding. Handprints. They were small, too small for an adult, but somehow too unnatural for a child. The fingers were long, almost stretched, and the prints were smeared, as if whatever had left them had been dragging its hands across the glass. A sickening chill ran down my spine. It had touched my window. It had been pressing against it. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I couldn't stay here tonight. I needed to leave, to go anywhere but here. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. My mother. My father. Even my grandmother. I needed to tell someone. But who would believe me? I hesitated over my grandmother's number. She had warned me before. Told me not to look. Maybe she knew more. Maybe she had the answers I needed. I tapped the call button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then she answered. You looked, didn't you? Her voice was tight, urgent. No greeting. No small talk. Only fear. My mouth went dry. I think it saw me. Silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said. Then you need to listen very carefully. Whatever happens tonight, you cannot look again. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. My grandmother's words sent a shiver through my spine, but I forced myself to speak. What do you mean? What is it? She hesitated. I could hear the fear in her breath, the way she seemed to struggle to say it. It's not something you can fight. Not something you can reason with. It only needs you to see it, just once. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I already saw it. Not fully, she said sharply. Not yet. But if you look again, if you make eye contact with it, it will know. And then it won't leave. My heart pounded against my ribs. What happens if I do? She didn't answer right away. Then, in a hushed voice, she whispered, then it will come inside. I felt the blood drain from my face. You have to leave, she continued. Go to someone else's house. Stay anywhere but there. Do not be alone tonight. I wanted to listen. God, I wanted to grab my keys and run out the door that second. But something inside me hesitated. Grandma, why does it come at 3 a.m.? The line went silent. Then she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. Because that's when the door is weakest. My stomach twisted. I didn't ask what door she meant. I knew. That night, I packed a bag, hands trembling as I stuffed clothes, my phone charger, and anything else I thought I might need into it. I would leave. I would spend the night at a friend's house. But as I reached for my keys, something stopped me. A feeling. A pull. I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were drawn. The glass was closed. But I felt it. It was there. Standing just on the other side. Waiting. A cold, sharp dread settled into my bones. It wanted me to look. I gritted my teeth, shoving the fear down, and grabbed my keys. I needed to move, now, before. Knock. My breath hitched. Knock. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost playful. Knock. 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 I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't going to look. Then. Tap. 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 Lighter now. Closer. As if it were tapping its nails against the glass, teasing me. Leaving so soon. I froze. It had never spoken before. I backed away, trying to steady my breath. I wouldn't look. I wouldn't let it in. But then. Something moved. Not outside. Inside. A soft creak. The sound of a footstep on the wooden floor. My stomach dropped. I had locked the door. I had been alone this entire time. So why did I feel something breathing behind me? I couldn't move. I felt the breath on my neck, slow, steady, wrong. The air behind me had changed, turning thick and freezing, like something had sucked the warmth out of the room. I gripped my keys so hard they bit into my palm. I wanted to turn. I wanted to run. But my grandmother's warning echoed in my head. Whatever happens tonight, you cannot look again. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a slow step forward. If I could just get to the door. Knock. The sound came from the window again. But that wasn't possible. Because whatever had been outside was inside now. The breath on my neck stopped. I clenched my jaw, stepping forward, my foot barely making a sound. The door was right there. A few more steps and creak. A floorboard groaned behind me. It was moving. Closer. Too close. I squeezed my eyes shut and lunged for the door, yanking it open. The hallway was dark, but I didn't care. I ran, my feet slamming against the wooden floor as I bolted for the stairs. I heard it behind me. Soft footsteps. Too light to be human. Too quick to be normal. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I ran. The moment I reached the front door, my shaking fingers fumbled with the lock. Come on. Come on. I twisted it. Pulled the handle. The door wouldn't budge. Like something was holding it shut from the outside. Then, from behind me. You already looked once. The voice was soft. Too soft. And right next to my ear. My body locked up. My instincts screamed at me to not turn around, to not look, to not let it win. But then it laughed. Low. Raspy. Not quite human. I gritted my teeth. My hand trembled on the doorknob. And then. The clock struck 3 a.m. Dong. The house shook. The walls groaned. And then, suddenly, the door flew open. I tumbled forward, hitting the porch hard. The air outside was cold, sharper than winter, even though it wasn't the season for it. My ears rang with an awful, screeching sound, like something furious and starving and wrong. I scrambled to my feet, gasping. The door behind me slammed shut. And then. Silence. Only my own ragged breathing. Only the wind whispering through the trees. I didn't dare move. My body trembled as I stared at the door, afraid it would open again. But it didn't. Because whatever was inside had no reason to follow me. I had made it out. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't over. I stood on the porch, my breath clouding in the freezing air, my mind racing. My body screamed at me to run, to get as far away from that house as possible. But I didn't. Because I saw something move. Not inside the house. Not behind the window. But in the reflection of the glass. My stomach twisted. My body refused to turn around, but I could see it in the faint glow of the streetlights, a shape, standing in my doorway, staring at me. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, its limbs too thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And its eyes. Black holes. Endless. Empty. And yet. I knew it was looking at me. The whisper of my grandmother's warning echoed in my head. If you make eye contact with it, it will know. I squeezed my eyes shut. I needed to get out of here. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I needed to call someone. Anyone. I pressed the screen, trying to dial. And then, in the reflection, I saw it move. A slow, twitching step forward. My breath hitched. Then another step. And another. It was coming toward me. I forced my legs to move, stumbling off the porch, nearly tripping over myself as I ran to my car. The keys. Where were my? There. I grabbed them, shoved one into the lock, and yanked the door open. My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I didn't look up. I didn't dare look at the house. Instead, I turned the key, whispering desperate prayers under my breath. Please start. Please start. The engine roared to life. Relief flooded my chest. Until I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Tap. 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 My breath caught. It wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from my car window. Slow. Playful. Like it was mocking me. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Do not look. Do not look. Do not look. But then, it whispered. A voice inside the car. You saw me once. A shiver ran through my body. Now you will always see me. I screamed. Slamming my foot down on the gas pedal, I tore out of the driveway, my tires screeching against the pavement. My chest felt like it was going to explode, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But as I drove down that empty, moonlit road, I realized something. It wasn't behind me anymore. Because now, it was sitting in the back seat. It knows where I sleep. I didn't go home. I drove through the empty streets, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My breathing was shallow, my heart still hammering from what I had seen, what I knew was sitting behind me. But I didn't look. I couldn't. I could feel it there, though. The weight of its presence. The cold air pressing against the back of my neck. I should have crashed. I should have driven straight into a tree with how badly my hands were shaking. But something guided me forward, an instinct I didn't understand. A desperate need to escape. Yet deep down, I already knew. There was no escaping this. My apartment was a few miles away. The streets were dark and empty, the world asleep, completely unaware of what followed me. But then, just as I turned onto my road, it laughed. A low, distorted chuckle. I gritted my teeth, forcing my eyes on the road, refusing to acknowledge it. Then, just as I reached my parking lot, a voice slithered into my ear. I like your room. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, tires screeching. My chest heaved, my entire body drenched in sweat. I turned off the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when I looked up, I saw something move in my apartment window. A shadow. Waiting for me. I gasped. My door was locked. My apartment was locked. How? No. No, no, no. This wasn't happening. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling. Call someone. Anyone. But the screen was black. Dead. And then, inside my car, the air shifted. I felt it lean in close. Its breath, slow and rattling. Go inside. I shook my head. Go inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse thundering in my ears. I'll be waiting. Then, the car door unlocked. Click. My entire body went numb. I shot my hand out, slamming the lock back down. But when I looked up at my apartment window again, the shadow was gone. The lights in my bedroom flickered. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, my curtains pulled themselves open. Something inside my room wanted me to see it. And I knew, no matter what I did, no matter where I went, it knew where I slept. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my locked car, gripping the steering wheel, staring up at my apartment window. The curtains remained open, the darkness inside watching me back. I told myself I wouldn't go in. That I'd drive away, find a motel, or even sleep in the car if I had to. But then, my headlights flickered. And before I could react, the car engine died. Silence swallowed me whole. I was trapped. Inside or outside, it didn't matter. It was already with me. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. Time became meaningless. Minutes? Hours? It was all the same. But at some point, exhaustion took over. My eyelids grew heavy, my body numb. And just as my vision blurred, the whisper returned. You can't ignore me forever. I jerked awake. My entire body tensed. The voice wasn't in the car anymore. It was inside my apartment. I turned toward the window, and my stomach twisted into a knot. The bedroom light was on. The bed was made. Like someone had been waiting for me to come inside. I swallowed the lump in my throat. And then, my phone buzzed. A message. With shaking hands, I grabbed it, staring at the screen. My heart stopped. A photo. Of me. Sitting in my car. Taken from inside my apartment. I dropped the phone, my breath shallow, my chest tightening with pure terror. And then, my apartment door creaked open. The light inside flooded the hallway. It was inviting me in. No. I slammed my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe. I would not go in. But then, the voice whispered one last time. You already let me in. A cold hand brushed against my shoulder. I screamed. I turned the key, praying the engine would start. And this time, it did. The headlights flared to life. And for the first time, I saw it. Standing in the doorway of my apartment. Tall, thin, its head tilted too far, its eyes nothing but endless, black voids. And it was smiling. I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of the parking lot, my pulse pounding in my skull. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. But even now, no matter how far I go, how many towns I pass through, I know the truth. This will never end. Because I saw it. And now, it sees me, too. I left everything behind. My apartment. My car. My old life. I moved across the country, changed my phone number, even started sleeping with the lights on. I told myself that if I just stayed in crowded places, never let myself be alone, it wouldn't find me again. But I was wrong. Because last night, at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up. Not from a nightmare. Not from a sound. But from a presence. The air in my room was heavy, thick with something unseen. I felt it before I even opened my eyes. That cold, familiar dread curling around me like invisible fingers. For a moment, I refused to move. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was safe. Then, the whisper came back. You should have never looked. My breath hitched. Slowly, so painfully slowly, I opened my eyes. My room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. Everything looked normal. But when I turned my head toward the window, the curtains were open. And standing outside, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was a figure. Tall. Still. Staring straight at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Its neck was twisted, its body too thin, its eyes empty voids that swallowed the night. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, it took a step forward. Not towards my window. Towards my front door. My pulse roared in my ears. I scrambled out of bed, my entire body shaking. Lock the door. Barricade it. Do something. But as I reached for my phone, it buzzed. A new message. From an unknown number. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't. But my shaking hands unlocked the screen anyway. There were only 3 words. I'm inside already. My breath stopped. From the corner of my vision, I saw my closet door creak open. And then, the lights went out. That was the last time I ever saw the world the way I used to. Because when I woke up the next morning, my room was normal. The window was closed. My closet door was shut. But something felt different. Like something had changed. Like I wasn't alone anymore. And now, every night at exactly 3 a.m., I wake up. Because something is always watching. Always waiting. And I know one thing for certain. This will never end. because once you look, it never lets you go.